welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking with Baeck about her work with collective presencing, which I think is just another example of these beautiful we space practices that are emerging. We talk about circling in this interview, and collective presencing is another one of them. And as you'll hear as we speak about it, it's a kind of, it's just so needed, this kind of way of being together, that I think it's one of the ways that will help us navigate these times we find ourselves in. So we'll talk about what is collective presencing, why is it important, what happens when you do it, what are some of the phases that we go through as we do it, what helps it work. And what you'll hear is Ria really embodies the kind of way of being that supports generative dialogue, emergent dialogue. It feels like we fall into that kind of space as we're speaking together. Ria is a real pioneer in this field. She's been working in this field for over 30 years. She has a master's in clinical psychology and a background in therapy, and is known for really embodying the way of being required for collective presencing. And you can find out more about her work by heading to collectivepresencing.org, and also about the book she's written on this topic there. As usual, if you are not on our mailing list and you want to stay in the loop about all things non-Coaches Rising podcast, then you can do so by heading to coachesrising.com. Put your name in the sign-up box there, and you'll stay in the loop. And as usual, if you feel like sharing this podcast, that would be marvelous, as they say in England, marvelous or fantastic. So you can do that by heading to coachesrising.com/podcast. Just click on the individual page there, or you can do it via Spotify. We have a growing Spotify listenership. So, okay, all that being said, here is the podcast with Ria Baeck. So Ria, great to be with you. How's things?
Hello. I'm not super well, but I'm good.
Yeah, we just checked in about that. So let's just see where this conversation takes us, and and we can just hold that, that you're not feeling at your best. And we're going to talk today about your work, collective presencing work. I think that it's really, the more I read about it, the more how important I see this kind of work. So how does that sound if we kind of unpack that?
Yeah, sure. And just, give me some hints in, or some roadways in, because
I will, yeah.
It's a big piece of
the
work.
question I think the perfect starting question is just, how would you describe what collective presencing work is?
Yeah, that's through the main door, huh?
Yeah, right.
Maybe a tiny bit of history to actually frame it where it came from. So many years ago, we found ourselves practitioners of circle practice, like how to actually be in circle as human beings have always done, but then, let's say, adapted probably to our world and our society and our ways of working these days. And we noticed that sometimes in circle, you could hit a spot together, like, whoa, that was kind of weird. Or we called it the magic in the middle, because it was like, sometimes it happened, mostly not, but how could we make it happen, actually? How could we create conditions? And so that question basically set me on a track of different gatherings with different inquiries, always in circle practice. Like, how could we come to that magic? How we could get some kind of handles on it? I guess some of I mean, some people know that, like, when you have like a really good conversation with a friend or something, and then suddenly it's 2 hours later, and who said what, and you're both enriched, but you don't know who caused what, or there's no cause and effect. It's in all directions at the same time, and so that's what we seek to find or seek to practice in these practice groups of collective presencing. So we're actually building on everybody is present as much as they can. And then we engage with the question, and then we see what is the collective wisdom that comes out of that. That's kind of in a nutshell.
But what is that moment? You know, like you describe it really well. I think we probably listening, we can recognize those moments where, and I think this is the same for one-on-one coaching too, you know,
Yes.
like there's these moments in coaching where it's like something's just there. It becomes an elevated conversation. And again, you're not, you know, maybe even the role of coach and client
Kind of
dissolves in a way, and there's something coming through. And what were those moments like in the groups where the magic came in?
Yeah, of course, I've been looking at this and thinking hard about this, and there's something of group flow that is happening. Like there's people who, like Jamie Wheel, who has been writing about flow, but mainly like a music band or sport players or something. But how to find that flow in the conversation, yeah? So it means that at a certain point, I would say the gaps or the distinctions between this is me and that is you over there, and we don't have anything to do with each other, or I don't know, our communication just travels, I don't know, over an invisible train and then travels back or something. Somehow our sense of where identity stops or begins, or where the collective stops or begins, kind of shifts, falls away. And you could even have it in silence. Like sometimes there's just silence, but it's not an emptiness with nothing in it. It's like a shared space of awareness, you could name it, maybe. And like it's an intentional shared silence, or yeah, we lack the words, you know, we lack the words to name it well.
Well, and it probably I don't know how you feel, but maybe in some ways it's beyond words, you know, like that's perhaps why it can be difficult to put language to it.
It's beyond words, maybe. Yeah, there is definitely that mystery, life, origin, source, spirit, whatever. That, but there's also our structure of language, like English and Dutch, which is my main language. It's very chopped up. Like I do something to you, or I do something to this cup of tea, and there's a subject actually having an action on a thing or somebody else, and then there is a reaction. Yeah, but it doesn't say much about what is actually happening in between us. It's hard to express and have words, and surely the grammar of the sentence doesn't allow for that. Like I heard once, I don't even remember, a tribe who would name trees by the sound the leaves make when the wind goes through the leaves. Yeah? That's
amazing.
That's something else than, oh, I see an oak over there. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
If we would name an oak by the sound of the leaves when the wind moves through, yeah, that's like almost unimaginable, I think, for our Western heads.
It makes me think of perhaps how Taoists might relate to their environment more. I have a friend who's originates from China, and she talked about how we have our sense of identity more in our relationship to things. Like I was talking to Dave Snowden yesterday, and he said also that there are groups around the world, like some of the Celtic fringes in South America, Southern Europe, all around the world, where people source themselves more in their relationship to things, perhaps, than in being an individual, like an I and me. That reminds me of what you're saying here.
Yeah, and it's a very Western, I would say, model of development. Like you should be a identity, a person. There is. You should go that track, and then you're accomplished or something, or then you will find success, and that there is a good essential piece in that. Like I think we need to search for what is our unique gift. I mean, my unique gift, your unique gift, but it only, how would I say, is actually valuable when it is in service of the collective, of the circle or the project team or whatever you're in. And that's what we forget. I mean, if you look at the mainstream business world, it's still a lot of fight between you and me and the boss and my colleague and to be on top of the ladder. And so we don't have to remove the whole identity striving thing. If we just keep that, everyone has unique gifts to give. Yeah. But the context is not because I need to be the best or the highest on the ladder, but it's like, how can we weave that into a collective and we all rise or we all thrive? That would be a better word. Yeah.
Because we've kind of dived in deep here. Do you think this is why practice is so important? Because what we're actually highlighting now is we've emphasized the individual, where we can get into the dynamics of me getting ahead against you, and it limits our collaborative capacity, our ability to source our collective intelligence. And what you're talking about sounds just completely different, like maybe even the identity disappears for a while and something collective is coming through.
Yeah, and it's hard for us to grasp because it seems like a paradox, but as if the identity needs to go away for the collective wisdom to be present. And the paradox is you actually should bring your unique stuff into the collective. Otherwise, the collective misses out on something. Yeah, you can, if you think like, oh, I cannot take up space and this is probably nothing to do with the topic. And I mean, all these kind of things that can go on in our heads / emotions. It's not conducive to have a free flow where the collective wisdom can shine or can emerge from. So it seems very paradoxical, but I think that's where we are going. Where can we move beyond the paradoxes?
Right. Because I guess one answer is, oh, well, we've emphasized the individual. Now let's emphasize the collective. But then we've just put the other pole in shadow.
Yeah.
And maybe like, because, you know, we've dived in deep here, and I want to talk about, in a sense, like move on for sure into like, how do you do this? Because you've learned a lot from going into this. But I think it's worth naming a couple of things. Like one is like, why? Because it sounds like there's some, you know, why do this? Yeah, there's something powerful coming out of it. And I still hold that sense of like, what is that magic, you know? What is it you're tapping into? But so there's the why, what comes out of it, and then what is it we're tapping into? And of course, then we want to kind of then go into like, what have you learned about how to actually do this? So maybe we could start with the what comes out of it, you know, what the why thing, like, because I think people.
What comes out of it? So far, the practice, as far as I know, hasn't boosted much in what I would say real-time projects or problems or business or, I mean, there are a few that I know of, but what I see, we have weekly drop-in calls where people just can come, and it's 1.5 hours. Many people come back every week, or a couple, like 6 or 8 weeks or something in a row, and what I notice is that because the frame, I would say the constraints are very simple. We have a talking piece, we have a check-in, we have a dialogue, we have a checkout. And talking piece means when somebody is speaking, everyone is listening. That's kind of the frame, the constraints, or as Snowden would say, the enabling constraints, yeah? And it turns out that many people find it valuable. Many people find even healing, as they name it sometimes. And people get a glimpse of what a next level of consciousness is becoming, or that we are trying to experiment with or try to embody more and more. Or that's what I say, we are just training our muscle to be in that new fluid conversational space, where I always say, if you would take notes of what was actually said and you would read it when you were not there, it would hardly make sense, because it's not a linear debate. Like, yeah, you said that, but then I'd have a counter argument, and then that's not how it goes. It's people bring pieces from their unique place, their unique stories, emotions, sensing. And it seems that when we put all these different pieces in the middle, it has value for the people who are there. It has meaning somehow. And I'm not saying everybody takes the same meaning out of it. That, I don't think that is the case, not at all. But it still seems to be quite meaningful. It's, yeah. It seems to me now that it takes us away from that, how we think conversation should be linear, kind of like I say something and you say something against, and then back and forth, and then at the end we have a synthesis, or we have a debate and we try to give arguments, and could always be seen as a play of who is winning, yeah. But in the collective presencing practice, nobody's winning, but maybe everybody wins something. So it's a different paradigm.
Do you bring in like content as well? So, because I know when we checked in a few weeks ago, I told you I was involved in circling a few years ago. And I just remember, and a lot of my friends still are, and I still am at times, but being in this space where you're presencing what's here, and there's a sense of like this flow that starts to emerge. You all attune to something, even when there's discord, So it could be that there's like tension in the space, but it's like you're all presencing that tension. And then it's an incredibly powerful consciousness practice. It's like it really does feel that it opens one into a kind of attuning to the evolutionary, the emergence of what's in the space. And that feels inherently fulfilling. There's something very meaningful about that. And, sometimes what I was very curious about in those circling spaces is like, what's it like to bring in like a subject, and do you do that with the collective presencing, maybe there's a community challenge or something? Yeah.
I'm very, I don't know how to say that. I hold on very well to like, it's only collective presencing when there's an actual inquiry about something. Like there is a question in the middle, a question that we all care about that kind of resonates with us. And then there's a whole practice and expertise, you could say, of how to articulate such a question. Yeah. So make sure that there are no assumptions in there, or at least not many, or
at least when there are,
and what is it that we're really, really curious about? What is it that we really, really don't understand? And it's not a question about how do I get rid of hunger in my city, or that's too surface like. Like, what would the question be that addresses more deeper layers, more deeper ground, maybe is a word we could use here. So there were what you call the circling practice. It's like what is unfolding between you and me here and now. Yeah. And you get really good training in what to notice what is happening in yourself and what is happening in the other, maybe, and checking that. And so you get real good sensing organs and really good articulation skills. And I would say apply that in a group context around a real question. Mm-hmm. Then you have something of collective presencing practice.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And so do you notice that there are like phases to the practice? Like I know you wrote about circles of presence and circles of creation, but like, do you notice that there are phases to the group, where they perhaps have to come into coherence and so on?
Yeah. Like, I think it's very human. Every new group, every new circle has what my friend Helen would call like, first the personality need to empty out a bit. Like some stories need to be told, or we don't start. Most of the time, we don't start with like, oh, everybody knows what to do. Everybody's totally at ease. We're totally grounded, centered. I haven't seen that unless in my own circle where we meet for years and years and years, yeah, where we can do that, and we start with a natural silence. But when a new group start this practice, you can people want to try this, and they want to experiment, and they have some kind of clue, but of course the personality comes through, or the habits come through. So you need some of that, how to become present, that circle of presence, that learning process, before you actually can engage with, like, okay, now most of the time, most of us can be present, really present. Now we can dive into the collective intelligence, the collective wisdom, and see what comes through.
Yeah.
And you never know where it switches, or what kind of story from somebody kind of, sometimes you could feel like, now we're moving in that direction.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I think, well, I know those moments too, you know, both one-on-one with clients, but where you just feel it drop. Yeah. And it's like, okay. Yeah. And then you can also recognize when that's not happening. And so have you found that it's actually therefore possible, you can create the conditions where that's more likely to happen, you know, that kind of shift?
What I learned over time is how I enter the space and how I frame the conversation. If I can speak from my own center, my own grounding, my alignment, it seems that invites other people to that same alignment. I'm not saying that's not science. It's not because I do it that it always will happen, but it's conducive. It's what they call the entrainment, you know, like if enough people of a group have a certain level of awareness, and how they speak and how they behave will entrain the others into the same level of awareness. And then there's the slowing down with the talking piece. So the conversation goes really slow. We always mention you can invite silence, like even if you say, like, I pick up the talking piece now, but I first want a minute of silence. And then you can sometimes feel the whole group like, and so I will never host a group on my own. Like, I have always co-hosts, even they don't do anything. Like, they're just there, they're just participating. But they either said, like, I want to learn more about this, or they have learned different paths, like meditation, or any kind of these new we practices, or like circling or others, and they kind of know what is the space we want to get to. So somehow there is an invisible holding, I would say, of invisible container, we sometimes say, whatever that means. I mean, again, we don't have words. I mean, exact words. We do have some words, but what is that? A container or a field, or that's so much of that is intangible, and still you can see, feel real change, or real insights, or meaningful experience, or
it feels like this kind of like post-rational realms that we're, moving into, and that where things do become like fields and intangible, and yet are completely tangible at the same time. It's like undeniably here. You can feel that shift, and everybody, you can feel that sense of group coherence when it arises, and yet it's post-rational in a sense. Yes, it's also informing the rational, but it's beyond it.
I think let's say the next edge, or what we're moving towards, is how can some of the mental and the conceptual that we also need have a real dance with that other kind of knowing, of sensing, intuition. Like, how can we go beyond that paradox? Kind of, it's either we have a conceptual conversation, or either we sit in a circle and know how is that dance? Where facts are, let's say, if we pick up again hunger in my neighborhood, what are the facts? It's really good information to bring in. Yeah, like how many people actually are under the poverty line, or how many children don't have food enough, or, I mean, there's facts and science and all this post-rational, whatever you call it, ways of knowing, I call them. And we need that wholeness of knowing. And we are still trying to figure out, I think, how that works, how that could work.
Yeah. The two things that really struck me there, you said like the wholeness of knowing, and the dance. Like, what's that like for you? What are those two like for you?
I notice these days, I don't know if you or your listeners are do know about places like the Stoa and Rebel Wisdom.
Yes.
They have lots of videos and lots of interviews with, let's say, bright minds who know something about the future and who know something about what's going wrong. And some of them are highly conceptual, that even sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I can actually understand this. I turn it off. But my intuition tells me they are up to something. They have something, yeah? But it's, but these people are then not inclined to sit in a circle and have that slow pace unfolding kind of thing. Although I noticed in both these communities, you could say, of the Stoa and Rebel Wisdom, there is this search for how do we actually integrate the conceptual knowledge of, like, Dave Snowden is also some of these guys. I call them the guys, yeah? I mean, good stuff. But sometimes I'm like, oh, my head blows open or what?
Yeah.
And it seems I was thinking the other day, like, maybe we need some translators or something in between, or bridge builders, or... but I think it's one of my private hopes to actually be in circle practice in collective presencing, where people can bring the facts and the theory, and we then understand something really, really deeper. Yeah. But not with our heads, but embodied knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that touches me. So there's something about like the mind, the unintegrated mind, I think, and I'm not referring to these people explicitly here, just in general, where you can feel it, and then there's a sense where the mind is integrated, and there's a sense, perhaps this speaks to your question of the wholeness and the dance, where there's a kind of gnosis, like with a Gnosis. So it's like ontology, and is it epistemology or etymology? I can't remember the knowing. Anyway, one of those two, I forgot.
Epistemology.
Yeah, so they come together, yeah?
Yeah.
And that's like knowing and being become part of one, whole. And that has a very palpable sense to it. And so I think like, it's almost like as you speak, I get a sense of like a tantric element of this, where the facts are a facet of a felt experience, and when they're spoken, they're like points, nodes within this experience, and they give a kind of definition to it, and yet they're not devoid. They're not cut off from the wholeness of the experience, which is perhaps when it's purely intellectual. That's what we can feel sometimes, where it's like, yes, like it's all like yes, and like there's something missing here.
Yeah. And what do we then actually do the next day? Yeah, that is my question. Or just recently in a conversation with Jordan Hall, and he was explaining, and he apologized for being meta abstract, and at a certain point I put a question in the chat. I'm like, what is the real question here, actually? Like, sometimes you can build so much theory and it might all be good stuff, but what would the theory serve, actually? Like, what is the question on the ground in our daily lives that actually can draw from that theory for at least some input? But if I miss the translation in between, I cannot do that on my own. Maybe others can, but
well, as you share this and you speak, it's like I can feel the sense of the presencing here now. I think I feel that there's a strong transmission of that way of being from you in general, as I hear you speak, and you bring yourself. It's like it invites me into a deeper considering, presencing. And so the reason I'm sharing that is because, like, I can feel the presence, the generative presence of like, how do we bring these together? The brilliance of these people that you're naming, I have such a high respect for what Rebel Wisdom and the Stoa and Dave and Jordan, beautiful man, what they're bringing into the world. And yet we're sensing, and I don't think they would disagree with us,
No.
like, I think they would be like, yes. And so, like, you can feel, why I'm saying is you can feel the livingness, the generativeness of that inquiry here now. It's like,
because it is my inquiry at the moment. That's like, how is that going to happen? I'm really curious. How?
What comes up for you when you ask that question?
What comes up? In a way, it's what I believe or sense or intuit that is what we really need. And I mean, if we just look at the world and all the problems that are going on, all these wicked problems that are so complex, to use Dave Snowden's language, and there's something new that we need to learn. That's my sense. And collective wisdom is one way, or is one element. Integrating these different ways of knowing is another element. And that's my felt sense that that's what's needed. At some point in time, I said, we don't have time anymore to do the things quickly. I mean, that's a huge paradox, but I think we need to really sit down in many, many places, sit together, heal the wounds, not to forget, personal, cultural, generational, but not for the sake of healing, but for the sake of integration and freeing the life's energy that is stuck in all these traumas, which is then available to figure out what we do with this mess, in a very creative way, in ways we haven't seen yet, I think.
So I get a huge resonance. Like I feel, yes, like inside of me, as you name that, I was sat with a sense of like, perhaps it is about that evolutionary creativity that is the missing ingredient of the purely brilliant intellectual. It's like there's something about the force of that. That the energy of creativity of the evolutionary energy that is and how that's being dampened, and I've blocked is the right word, by our collective ways of being together right now, which are very polarized and traumatized. And I think this is the elephant in the room, like I was in conversation with Thomas Hubel the other day. And I just hear strongly, and when you speak, echoing some of what he's saying, like that.
Totally.
We're swimming in these waters that we just take for granted.
And we think it's normal.
We think it's normal. Exactly.
We think it's normal. And then suddenly somebody cries and people get upset and, shall we bring her to the doctor or to the hospital? Or instead of, can we just hold that together? Just be with intensity. It can be intense, and sure, coaches and therapists know that. It can be very intense to sit with deep trauma and witnessing that and holding that. But we can do it. We are capable of. And when I understood, like, how does healing happen? Let's say in an individual personal client who's traumatized. the things of the past don't change. What has happened has happened. Yeah. But somehow in the relationship, in the witnessing, in the being present with, in that social engagement, to use the term of the theory, yeah, people have another look at what happened. I mean, the facts didn't change, but the trauma gets healed. So if we look at that phenomenon, I was wondering, what if we look, let's say, to the future, to the potential, not to the past, but to the future? Like, can we not do the same thing in the present moment that flips the future? Yeah. I mean, you have to get out of linear time, basically, and understanding that any change happens in the moment.
Yeah.
Not yesterday, not tomorrow. It always happens in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I don't know if this is like the theory, the territory of theory U, you know, like bottom of the U, or, you know, Whitehead talked about the future. I must admit, it's been a while since I read him, but it's like the sense of the future pouring into the present. But I'm struck by this question, you know, like, can we flip that, and can we actually attune? I'm phrasing it as attuning to the future that wants to emerge.
Yeah, yeah. Or that's if traumatized people can tune into a potential that heals them. Yeah. I mean, not grammar is not good here, but there is also a potential for society, for the global community. There is a potential. We can do more than what we do now. And it's not tomorrow, it's in this moment that we tap into the potential, which make tomorrow different. Yeah, which changes the course of where tomorrow goes.
Well, it makes me think of ensoulment, you know, or like one of the things I've done with my clients a lot is to have them, you know, shift. It doesn't work so well if you do this from an agitated or, you know, very common state of mind. But if people can slow down, and then really tune into their deepest heart's longing or calling, and then articulate that. And then actually, what you're saying is like, well, that's what I say to them. It's like, of course, it's not in the future. It's now. It's here now. And so what's the experience of tuning into that like? And they can get an embodied sense of the calling as it shows up now, as a place to live from now. Mm-hmm. And I think as I've learned about this idea of soul, it's the same thing. It's like we kind of like turn our frequency towards our unique, like you said earlier on in our conversation, we have a unique offering, and there's something, I think, there's something healing about that too. It's like, it's a different paradigm. It's a different state of consciousness than I'm broken or I'm deficient. It's like it is whole, and it comes with a sense of tuning, a contact with what's mine here to give in this life. And I think that's sorry, I know I just cut you off, but I think it's probably one of the teachings of our times in terms of what you said about time. Like, do we have time as a collective to, you know, to really tune into that? And I think that's just to say, I know I just cut you off, but I think it's probably one of the teachings of our times in terms of what you said about time. Like, do we have time as a collective to, you know, to really tune into that? And I think that's just to say, I know I just cut you off, but I think it's probably one of the teachings of our times in terms of what you said about time. Like, do we have time as a collective to, we need to change fast, or things need to change fast. And what will happen? What will do that in a non-linear way?
Yeah. Yeah. And because it needs to change fast, it's very linear still. Yeah.
Nice. Good catch.
Yeah.
Good catch. Right.
It's urgent.
Right.
Yes, in a way it is. And if it's coming from fear, we're not really present, but we are in a trauma response, basically.
Right.
Either fighting it or fleeing it or whatever. So actually being with I call it the ugliness of the world, like it's shit for many, many people, yeah? If you look at nature, it's real shit. And can we be with that? Not fighting, not fleeing, so no trauma response, but being present with the weight of it and the huge, how do you say that? How big it is, yeah? And hold each other in the overwhelm, in the fear, in everything. And then what comes up? Yeah. That's what I think is needed. And yeah. I'm not saying it's easy, but it seems to be the challenge at the moment.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, do you feel that there are more people open to doing what you just described?
Yeah, I notice that the word trauma and my trauma response, and I'm triggered, and becomes more into the mainstream, yeah, especially in, let's say, business who are into more self-management and horizontal organizations and all that, where people tend to spend more time on checking in with each other and looking at, little disputes or conflicts or trying to learn from that. I see that, trauma as phenomenon, let's say, becomes more into mainstream. If I just look, look back 40 years ago, even I studied psychology, I don't think the word trauma was ever used even. But there's if you see in a longer time frame, there is a change. And people wanting to know about it, like, what do I need to know when I'm a facilitator or a trainer? I don't want to make it worse for people. Or what is my own trauma response? When do I get triggered? And how do I handle that? So it's the same, like I always say, when I was small, child psychology was like nowhere. Like, I remember my parents had one book on child psychology and how to do education. Yeah, Dr. Spock. I don't know how many countries that was spread, but if I now look at my children dealing with my grandchildren, I mean, child psychology and how you should be with little children, it's like miles apart. And I'm not saying this is happening everywhere, but it is happening. And from these people, it will cascade and ripple out to more. And so we need to have a big time frame to see these changes.
And I wonder if the pandemic is also accelerating that sense of people asking big questions about the way, not just on an individual level, but collectively about the way we live in relationship to our planet and to work and to materialism.
Yep.
And understanding of how that's partly driven from, an avoidance of, or a lot of it is a coping mechanism to not being able to feel ourselves and be here. And
it makes it seems to magnify all kinds of things. Magnify that we don't know our neighbors, or magnify that we actually need to have walks in nature, or all kinds of things. It seems to make things more extreme in all kind of ways.
Yeah.
And people stepping out of the system and saying, I'm quitting my job and I'm moving, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that more too, as with people I know.
Yeah.
So as we just come to a close, the question comes up about what excites you at the moment in terms of is there something you're exploring right now, some kind of dimension of this work, or anything that's you find really exciting? Or
it's a bit odd maybe, but for the longest time I've been organizing trainings and workshops and gatherings, and it was always you need to put it on social media and you need to have a nice invitation and all that marketing stuff, and to get your list filled and people showing up. And I'm now on pension since a couple of months, and I can basically do what I want, and I do a lot on the gift economy. And I see that collective branding is just moving. It's moving. It just moves by itself. And that's amazing. Okay, and this person wants to do this with me, and there's a group forming, and there's an idea. And I'm like, okay, how to be in the same way when it becomes bigger or something, or what is a right way to let it grow is not even a right word, but if it wants to spread, I don't know how to do that in a way that is in alignment with it. Yeah, it doesn't become a stretch of me or overstretching of some other people, or not falling back in, this is what you do when you get bigger, then you start organizing it in this way or that way, or I don't want to do that. But then what?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that speaks to the new emerging ways of being in business as well, and allowing things to grow into the world. And, we're in a similar question in a way, different, very different, but also it has some echoes of that, of how do we we don't want to be controlling all this and the gatekeepers, and everything's about making money, and that does help us to feed ourselves and to have impact. And we live in a world of money, so it's not bad. I don't want to make money bad, but it's if that's the only game in town, it's very impoverished. So how to let this how it wants to organically grow and well, maybe what you're sharing now sparks something for people who are listening. And I don't know if you're open to people reaching out or about the work and stuff.
Of course.
I'd love to direct people to where can people find out more about the work?
So there is a website that's called collectivepresencing.org, and it's mainly, it holds an ebook that you can download with gift economy. And there's, as I said, more and more events are coming up that will be on the website. And yeah, there's some other resources and a link to YouTube. And I mean, it's not big, but you can find some good stuff. Yeah.
Just one last thing that comes to mind is, you mentioned Rebel Wisdom and the Stoa, and I do get one of the things we've been talking about is this sense of like, how can we connect people together? There are these groups of people, in the world who are doing this work, and people are coming at, they're doing different things, but there's obviously a lot of synergy. And how can, this is part of our question, how can we support other people? How can we become a network? Not that we want to make an explicit network necessarily, and but how can we in a way that serves humanity, in a way that serves life? That's something I'm sat with, really.
Yeah, I looked myself quite some years ago, it should be good that all these networks get connected, and ULAP and Presencing Institute and Art of Hosting and Dragon Dreaming and permaculture and all these good things that were happening. And I tried a couple of times. I heard from others, and I come to think that it's in the local projects that you actually need to meet. Like, what is happening in your city, in your town, in your neighborhood, in your school, in your local gardens, and use all you have there. Yeah. Use your facilitation skills, use your coaching skills, use your whatever skills you have, and be there. Try to make something happen, little changes. I think that's where we need to go, instead of linking the networks with the networks. I mean, for what reason? Yeah. Do something on the ground, and if you think you miss something, or you miss a certain expert or certain expertise, you will find them if you put the question out. But from my experience in our local town, it's amazing what expertise we have together. I mean, it's amazing, because there is an architect, and there is a facilitator, and there's a general practitioner, and there is a builder, and there's artists, and there's, you name it, any expertise we would need, we have it. Yeah? It's really amazing. Or if they're not really in the group, at least somebody knows somebody who has the expertise and is willing to give it.
Yeah.
So that's also a different paradigm.
Yeah, and I guess if it's not having any impact in the local, what's the point? It's
that's where I'm coming to.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Zach Stein said something similar on the podcast about it's in the local, the immediacy of your connections with neighbors and friends that's important now. Yeah. Ria, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's really touched me, and I'm just grateful that you were willing to come and share yourself with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope people can take some thing out of it. So that's good.
Here I am again. Hope you enjoyed this podcast with Ria. Just a word up or a heads up. If you're not on a mailing list and you want to be in the loop about the things we create that are not this podcast, then head to coachesrising.com. On the homepage there, you'll find a sign-up box. And yeah, if you feel like sharing this podcast or leaving a review, I'd be very grateful. And then the third thing, just be well. Be well in these times. 2021, here we are. I'm wishing you a good year, and I'll see you next time.